it has a bulkhead, most of them have bulkheads, and then the house, so is there any benefit to dividing them up?
So my question is like, so, and Chad can speak to this better because I'm not familiar with the city's CAO as much, but this is clearly a steep slope area. There's not much potential to build on the slope itself. So you're kind of fairly limited already, unless I am wrong about that, but I'm trying to guess I'm not.
Are there trails or trams or anything that people above?
No trams, there are some trails, but they're pretty precarious.
Down in the bulkhead, there are trails to go down?
There are some trails.
Gravity assisted.
But there's no trams?
No trams.
There's a lab.
Yeah.
There's the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is not here.
It is? It's all in steel.
Okay.
So if a homeowner wanted to build a walkway down to the beach similar to the Marine View Park, then they would or wouldn't be allowed to do that.
That is a choice that you need to decide on and give the feedback to Chad on.
What was that?
If a future landowner of this property here, where it's rather precarious, wanted to build a walkway down to his beach, his or her beach, that's similar to the one that's at Marine View Park, would they or would they not be allowed to do that?
Well, so right now, our current critical areas code would probably prevent them from doing that. So, like, if they were to come in, we would require them to do a critical areas report to identify the wetlands, the slope, what's on that property, and what those unique items are on there, and then address if, they want to put in, if they're going to cut out the trees, or, what's the erosion control measures that would need to be called out. Is that something that's supported by the critical areas ordinance? Right now, I don't think that you'd be able to do that.
I'd build it exactly like the one at Marine View Park.
Okay. Well, I'm just kind of saying that that's the process that we have right now for critical areas. So just so everybody knows, it's like I've been directed to use our current critical areas code information, so we don't have to create all of that.
Yeah.
It's already there. You guys agreed on it back in 2008. It was adopted. And then we're not creating the wheel. The only thing we have to do with the state is that there's items in the code that I have to accept out for administrative, some mitigation, the reasonable use process, the fees, that kind of thing. But the nuts and bolts, the scientific information that's in there is what we're going to use for this. And it already exists. So like if you were to come in on your property and you wanted to put in a path just like Marine View Park, we would run through that process that's in there right now until this is in place. And then once this is in place, these rules would take effect.
So I guess the bottom
I'm
line,
sorry, I just had
I'd
to
see
interject
how
that.
Richard feels about it, but
With the parallel,
but the parallel versus
Right.
at the end of the day, it doesn't sound like it would make much difference. It actually might be simpler to just have that be urban residential
Right.
free.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Exactly.
because you've got a couple different land use issues going on when you do the parallel. You've got something going on in the lower that might not necessarily be tied to the single family
He's saying
residence.
Shoreline.
Sorry.
Shoreline.
Yeah, I know you're confusing me when you do that. Okay, so I don't know. I don't know if that makes you happy or not, or to go that route,
I have to
or.
get up at 6 a.m.
Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
gonna be-
Richard,
Yeah.
can you make sure to give me your idea though on that?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, because I'm like, it's not a bad one,
No, that's
and there's
fine.
other people that's expressed that as well.
I'll detail it out.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, cool. So for right now, the general consensus or a general idea on it is for segment 4 is a standalone segment. Is that correct?
At this point.
At this point, and we're looking at Shoreline Residential 3 possibly, with comments coming in from Richard that I would circulate. You guys are going to want to look at that and see what he's talking about. Like I said, this is going to be a forum that continues on past this meeting. So on to segment 5. Again, a lot of residential, and then our anchor, which I would consider the cove.
Standout lawns.
So, starting with map 31, covers this segment. So segment
Cove.
5 side ended there, I believe.
Just a moment on 4. You said this category is calling for public access. There isn't any public access on 4.
Where do you see the call for public access in
It
sport?
says an additional purpose is to provide appropriate public access and recreational use under shoreline residential. That is 6.
Okay.
Well, you could designate that line item.
Keeping in mind that one of
That's still
the
public.
main goals of the Shoreline Management Act is also to provide public access to the shoreline environment. It's one of the overarching principles in the Shoreline Act is to try and get people to the beach and/or enjoy the water in some fashion,
Or to view it.
or to enjoy the water in some fashion. So it is one of an overarching goal, and you'll see public access sort of throughout most of the act as far as trying to promote it wherever possible.
But not mandated.
Right.
Because you're not gonna
That
mandate
area
public
is-
access across my property.
No.
That area is not conducive to getting people to the water.
It's not accessed currently.
Right.
Take a parish.
Or there
So
is
why
one.
is it necessary to put in there to provide for it? Because this is something that we're agreeing on, that we have no control over what happens down the road. Who interprets what?
This is where appropriate.
There's $1 billion spent every year on interpretation.
Pat, can we,
The shoreline residential, this is just a general description, and in a lot of communities, there's multifamily developments, condominium projects or whatever that go along the shoreline. So multifamily projects would be required to provide public access as part of their shoreline permit process. Individual, single-family property owners, that's not an issue.
But why is it in here then?
Well, it's in there because shoreline residential, this is a general description. Shoreline residential includes single-family and multifamily.
But we don't have
They
multifamily.
don't
Right,
have multifamily.
right.
So this is unique to Normandy Park and our property, right? I mean,
Right, but these were just general definitions.
Can
of
we-
the
we can
amount.
change
We
it.
need to
can we
change it.
tweak that, or
So
at
you
least
can-
clarify what our expectations would be for public
Just
access?
delete
Right,
that
If
part.
any.
yeah, and there's a whole public access section in the shoreline master program.
You
So,
admitted that there's some collusion or duress to retain a permit to do something, and only could do it if there was public access granted. Now, this is not concurrent with the way the deeds have been written on those properties since 1927.
well, this is a single family.
That's absolutely
single-family-
duress. When you make a statement that a person has got to agree to public access in order to put a tram or a step or whatever it is to access the water from his own property, that is clearly duress.
Well, we could have a long debate about that as it relates to multifamily development and getting approvals for it, whether it's in a shoreline or not, but it's not really relevant to.
It is
to
relevant.
No,
private property,
it's-
individual private lots,
In this-
single-family lots.
Yeah, in this particular situation, we're not zoned, this is not zoned for multifamily, so it would not take place. That's what we're trying to say, is it's not relevant.
It's the range of things that can happen, so like,
Right.
we put Marine View Park, I guess now we put that in urban conservancy.
Right.
Well, then you need to clarify that this is for multifamily purposes, because this
See,
is
it's
too
not,
broad.
it doesn't actually say you have to
It's-
do it, it's encouraging
Right.
I think this
public
goes-
access where possible.
And this doesn't only, when this is put into the shoreline master program, it doesn't have to be worded that way either.
Right, just delete it.
This is basically.
Right,
and
so
this
on
is
your
an
comment
educational
period, you
tool
can
for
put that in there,
tonight.
that helps me out a lot. So that's what we're saying. It's like, yeah, that's awesome.
Chad, just delete it, cross it out.
Now, that's great, if you don't put it in writing, because I'm not taking notes here, so it's really important we document this so that I'm not making this stuff up.
I think it's on page 14 and 15 of what was mailed to us,
It is.
where it talks about that in order to have to comply with that public access, you need to have at least 5 houses? Isn't it more than 4? Is that what it says in there?
So how that works, that's a subdivision law. And anytime that, anywhere in all jurisdictions are required to do this, anytime that you subdivide a property with 5 or more properties, you're in a formal subdivision, you go to a public hearing, and one of the components of that review is public access. We don't have any properties that would be going through that on our shoreline. That's why we're saying that portion, you need to not look at that, because it probably won't be in there when we're done.
This page 15 won't be in here when we're done?
No, you gotta remember, I sent the rough draft out so that you could look at it in terms of how it's going to be structured, where everything's gonna be put. I haven't even really got a chance to go through all of that because we don't have the uses and stuff down. A lot of that's gonna change after tonight.
Well, we will want that to remain though, so we'll know that we're safe when we're a single.
Okay, but what I'm saying is please don't read too much into that right now. You know, we really need to stay focused on these uses.
Well, but that's what's causing confusion. If we know that we're safe if it's a single
Right.
owner property,
And
then we're.
so no, but that's where, okay, so in your comments, you need to pull this out and
So
put
even
this in
though
your
it
comments.
says it here, we still have to.
Yeah,
put it
yeah,
out.
because then that way, okay, so you gotta understand is that when I take this, they're gonna go, Chad, where did you come up with this? Oh, well, Mrs. Schmidt told me in the meeting that she wanted to see it there. Well, I didn't see her comment on it. Oh, okay, well, she did, she told me that. So that's what I'm saying, your documentation helps me on these items that you find important. So it's that we
Okay,
keep this stuff in there.
It is, yeah, it is kind of important to know. I mean, I would have thought I don't need to write a comment on it because it's in the document already.
And I'm not, like I said, I am so not focused on that
Okay.
portion right now that I'm trying to get you guys through this exercise. And
It's in the,
Okay.
there's some draft language right now on page 5 and 6 for shoreline residential. And given that this is just a really rough draft, it says, the purpose of shoreline residential environment is to accommodate current and planned residential development and pertinent structures, as well as appropriate public access and recreational uses in areas suited for urban densities.
So that implies last 5 words, densities
Well,
imply.
urban density would be a multifamily situation, where basically.
Is that how the Department of Ecology reads that term?
What you have in your area is single-family residential, it's not an urban density.
That's correct, and that's why the paragraph doesn't belong when you're dealing with single-family residents.
But so where we're at is, this is shoreline, I wanna say it right, shoreline residential, 2,
three.
3. But what we've got, it sounds like what we're gonna have to do is tweak with this public
Right,
access
so
thing.
within that area, people were hearing that we're gonna need to tweak with the language. People are gonna need to give me ideas on that they adamantly don't want that in there. I'll respond back like, okay, I'll try. State says I need to have this certain language in there. I'll respond back, you don't like it, you can help me, and we'll go back and forth until we can hammer something out. Or we come to a point where, okay, well, we're gonna have to take it out in a public hearing. Do you know what I mean? That's kinda how it'll work out.
So we need to add that because we have shoreline residential 1, 2, and 3, so we need to write a comment
So-
on all of those.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah.
Is the
Yeah,
state
but none of
sensitive to
them
what
are-
we're talking
I mean, they're all
about here?
single family, no.
That we're talking about single-family residential areas that are not subject to public access or not subject to the multifamily?
Well, it wouldn't be subject to, there's no multifamily.
Right, I guess.
But Colin is correct that one of the main overarching principles in the Shoreline Management Act is to ensure public access to the shoreline, either physical or visual. Doesn't mean that it happens all the time, that's one thing that the plan has to accommodate to a certain extent. Not necessarily in this area, but somewhere along the shoreline.
So does
The
Greenview
marine
Park
part.
qualify for
Yeah,
part of
Yes.
that?
Yes.
But not the code.
But not the code.
No,
Not in this.
that's a private property, so.
Those across it.
I just have one question here for
Kathleen?
clarification on these definitions right here. This is a state definition right here of the shoreline residential, is that
It's
correct?
actually, it's called a purpose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
But that was taken directly from what
Yeah.
the state set up as
yes,
criteria.
I didn't
And I
alter
think-
it.
Yeah, and I think that's what this gentleman here was referring to. That needs to be addressed.
Right, and
In
that's where I'm
addition-
wanting the
okay, I
comments
just
to
wanna
make sure that,
make
because we're
sure I
using,
understood
we're
it.
using the titles, or, you know, we're using these names because it's similar to what the state's called out. But if we're gonna tweak it, I need to get that in.
Okay.
That's all good stuff.
Okay.
I'm still struggling a little bit. So we're defining these areas of shoreline, but yet, so for example, we've said Beaconsfield area is more of an urban conservancy is what has been said. But what does that mean exactly as far as implementation? I mean, I think we've talked about how that's a more stringent or
Right.
more, so.
We can't define it until we start putting the uses in there.
Right,
So
it's
what
like
happens
putting the
is,
cart before the horse, you know?
no, these segments need to be called out, which ones are we comfortable keeping and combining first, okay? What are their like characteristics and land uses, we're coming up with that, and what's happened is we're going through, we're doing the designations on top of it. What we're not doing is calling out the uses for each of those designations. In the exercise, what we would be doing is giving you an idea of like, okay, in here, as you follow through with these criteria, you guys are gonna call out, well, we know there's single family residences, do you want that to be permitted, allowed, prohibited? Put that stuff in there, it's gonna go into a matrix for that specific designation, okay? So that gives you more of a definition, you know, this is just an overarching idea of what you guys already have there. We're trying to fit that in with these things right here.
Yeah,
It's not gonna prohibit anything. What will prohibit it is when we talk about the actual uses that go into the matrix for each designation, we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, but if you define like segment 2 and 3 as urban conservancy, that's gonna restrict the uses in that particular shoreline, in that land.
Only in the
Why-
fact that what I'm doing is trying to match up what that existing character is. So we could just put it in the comments, Kathleen, that'd be great, so.
Yeah, but we've already clearly defined it. You can only do so much in that
Right,
particular area.
right, you have a park,
right.
you have a public park, so, Doug?
I'm not too sure that the Cove property should be one of these situations where it goes into a different designation than shoreline residential is namely.
You want it separate, or you want it as the same?
I think it evokes in what, and it's not residential, it's not gonna be homes.
Right,
So it seems like.
but you have a current zoning on there, it's zoned residential.
Right, I'm just suggesting that for a designation, which is the
Okay.
exercise we're going through.
Okay.
Just to tee it up, that it could be considered urban conservancy.
Okay. Which would match what you've got for Marine View Park.
And also be consistent.
Right, and we call out that a public park and a private park setting are considered identical, because those are the two same environmental designations, and you could do that. And we would just call it public versus private. They're both recreational
I
uses.
think it's gonna be how the code manages today and will manage property in the future. And so it really differentiates the way that the residences south of there and north of there are gonna manage their properties.
Okay,
I.
okay. Kathleen, does that kind of,
Well,
is Doug
you know what?
more on the spot on
No,
that,
but
or?
let me pull it back, because you've designated 2 and 3 as one parcel, so to speak here, and you're gonna define that as urban conservancy. There's sections in 2 and 3 that probably don't fit, so just say, for instance, I'm a property owner down there, and now all of a sudden I have to play by those rules of urban conservancy.
We haven't set the rules yet.
Well, okay, but
And
I can just tell you right here, when it says restore ecological functions in open space, I can tell you about the rule
Kathleen, what I
maybe.
heard is today,
That's,
it's actually rural residential. So if you were to compare apples to apples, you
What?
actually, it seems, urban conservancy takes you actually into a situation where one could argue that it is actually a little more intense use than what it is designated today.
I don't
Based
know.
on that definition, that,
You know, I'm looking at this.
right, and today the current shoreline, since 1991 at least, has been residential, or rural residential, which seems even more, based on that definition I heard, it seemed more just a thought. Yeah, you're right.
I've forgotten what the definition was.
Well, it talked about it being very rural character. And do we have that?
No, it's not.
It's in your Shoreline Master Program, I just read it out loud.
So look in the Shoreline Master Program, that you hand out.
Or no, it's not in that handout though. I had to bring the actual, yeah, no. The existing Shoreline Master Program, that's just the draft.
Oh,
Yeah.
Remember, that's just for structure. It's just to see how everything's gonna be placed together and where things are gonna go. That's all that was for.
In the existing one?
In your existing Shoreline Master Program is where I got your rural residential
Yeah,
environment
and
that
I
I
tried
read
to
earlier.
follow when you read it out.
Yeah,
Just-
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We missed one print. It seemed like I printed up
No,
enough
that's-
trees or dug up enough trees to give you guys. So we missed out on that. I'm sorry. And I can send it an email or I can mail that so everybody's got it. It's also online. It's just your current Shoreline Master Program. It's on page 10 of the document.
Okay.
So currently we're on segment, I believe 5. Okay. And I heard what was segment 5 was, actually I hadn't written anything down on that
End
one
of
yet.
Edgecliff all the way to the end of Cove.
Okay. And somebody wanted to call out that they wanted the cove to be a designation unto
I
itself.
threw that out there, there's others.
Did anybody else agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
Sean does?
I don't know. Read number
I-
6,
know.
it talks
Yeah,
about
I mean, there's
residential.
pros and cons to both. So, I mean, if we did separate it out into natural, we'd have to,
It might be more restrictive with the
Right,
restoration
exactly.
plans and stuff that you guys do.
Yep.
Pat, isn't that typical if they were to call it natural?
I thought was.
Urban conservancy.
Urban conservancy, I thought.
Well,
was what-
he was just asking like if they were to call it out as natural because
Yeah.
that would be a lot more restrictive.
Not
I
it
don't-
would provide
not on
protections
restoration.
as well as restrictions.
Okay.
So,
Not- You can
Right.
certainly
So-
also write it so that under natural designation, if you choose to, that restoration is an allowed use of this, I mean, you can describe the types of things, just like this is a generic description at this point in time. You have the option to add a sort of depth to that description so that you can do other things that are appropriate.
Okay.
Considering you're a city and not a rural area, most of the natural-ish areas are going to have some
Urban-
degradation
Okay.
that you
Okay.
need to fix in some fashion over the long term. So that's not that big of a surprise.
And it's actually listed in the definition.
Right. Okay.
that, local government should include planning for restoration of degraded shorelines within this environment.
Well, under the natural descriptions, it says shoreline areas that are relatively free from human influence or, and I can't hardly describe the cove as minimally free from it.
We kind of encourage use of the
tolerant of
cove.
human use.
Right.
It's the point,
Right.
It
but,
doesn't fit.
yeah.
4th of July beach.
When you were thinking natural, what were you thinking? Like,
Sorry?
when you were thinking natural, what was kind of like pushing that?
Oh, no, I mean,
It's probably one of the
that
most
it's
used.
dependent on where very low density use to be allowed in order to maintain ecological functions and ecosystems. Why process which the salmon streams and the
Right.
duck and the migration, duck migration and things like that. I mean, they're all,
Right. But we could write those in
right, no, that,
without limiting the activities that go on in the cove. And so what we
yeah,
would do
that's
is
why I was reluctant to
okay,
separate it out.
yeah,
I
okay.
agree with Doug. I think number 5, urban conservancy, fits the cove better than number 6, shoreline residential, is Shoreline Residential says the purpose is to accommodate residential development, and I can't
That's
imagine
not
anyone in
the
the room wants to build any houses on the Cove property,
Or public access.
or public access.
We're gonna get rid of that anyway.
So on this one, what we've got with segment 5 right now is we've got the idea that on segment 5 we're talking about shoreline residential again, but breaking out the cove to call that out as urban conservancy. Is that correct? Is that what I heard going on? Okay. On urban conservancy on the cove, do we want to call out anything special or just use this general? We want to make sure with the cove, they've been great stewards of the
For that
land.
urban conservancy, you wanna, and maybe for the other urban conservancies, you wanna denote that restoration is allowed.
Well, and yeah, and we'll be calling out that in the restoration plan stuff too.
Got it.
You
So
mentioned calling it private, so is there a reason to add private to that?
no, I distinguish private. That's in the uses, and it'll be something that I call out in the use table. It's a private recreation. You know, it's not a public. So that way, if the state were to look at it, they're going to know the difference between my public access points, which is Marin View Park. That's a public park, but the uses of the cove is a recreation facility for people that are Lot 8 owners, but it shares a lot of the same functions as a park, but it's private. So I always like to call it out as that's a private piece of property, but it shares those uses. It's not a single family residence, but it has a lot of functions of people using it as a public access. All those owners are using that as access for themselves in like a similar manner. So it's getting as close to a public park, but still maintaining its own identity.
And the
That's-
building is far outside the shoreline jurisdiction, correct?
You know, the floodplains and stuff kick in, and it's pretty close.
It's actually quite close.
It's really close. So with that, Karen?
To include shoreline residential,
Yeah.
because the cove is not the only
Building,
one.
the building is out.
Okay.
Wouldn't you include the first sentence in number 6, shoreline residential?
On 6, I don't know that I need to change anything for the cove. If you wanted to use shoreline
Is the
residential,
cove the only one in section 5?
yeah, that's your only recreational use. I would look at that as a recreational use, a private recreational use. So under that, if that's how you wanted to do it.
So to be clear then, I think for the cove, it seems like there's consensus that it should be urban conservancy, but in this particular case, I would want to make a denotation that it's for the, it's a private community club and the facilities thereof, that's important.
Right, so when I go in and describe my segment, and this is important, these are the kind of stuff when you guys give me this helps me out. So when I go in and describe 5, I'm gonna break out the cove property as an urban conservancy, and I'm gonna have a general description of why I'm doing that, you know, and it's a private recreational facility. You know, I'm going to give it a description of that, and it's very, like I said, it'll be specific to the code. So
What about the houses south?
the house is south. So what I've heard from House of South so far, I heard shoreline residential again, but that would be a number 4, or because we're up to 4 now. I have 3. I have on segment. So on segment 4. I have the suggestion of a parallel zone by Richard, and then I also have a general idea of shoreline residential 3 is what I have written down. That's
All the houses on the beach in 5.
so 5 is where we're at, Karen. We're trying to come up with
Starting
yeah.
with the arrow, could you
So
go to the map
That would be
to the south?
that part would be shoreline residential.
Okay.
Again, wouldn't it?
With the exception of the cove.
With the
Right,
exception of the
right.
cove. And once again, I guess that means it has to be shoreline residential, and that's what you were saying, 4. And once again.
but it doesn't have to. I can say 3 if I combine it with if we combine segments 4 and 5
I think the other question
into 1.
you guys might end up coming to eventually is what is the real difference between shorelines 1, 2, and 3? There may not be very much. There may be enough that you want to keep them separate. Right now, it might be worth sort of seeing if there's enough of a difference. But you may end up just wanting to merge them because there's not enough difference between the characteristics and the uses that you're going to allow.
If it's determined by the uses, probably the uses are gonna be the same. They're all private property. There's not room to add any kind of public access because there's no way to get people, you know, to the beach in any of these places, really,
Right.
without really encumbering somebody.
Right.
We see the
Karen's is full.
section number 5.
So,
Segment 5?
just to be clear then, I think this gets at Karen's question. Edge cliff, shoreline residential to shoreline residential 3, edge cliff.
Edge cliff, can you say segment?
Segment.
Segment
4.
4?
4, isn't it 2? We got 1 is separated out.
Segment 4
Is type 3.
is
Type 3.
shoreline residential.
Shoreline residential 3.
And then when it starts at Dr. Martin's house to the north, where it flattens out and it goes through the steels and
Where is that?
So this
right
is-
there.
That's segment
Yeah,
5.
doc,
So,
Segment
yeah.
5.
Segment
That-
5 starts here.
That's what you're calling shoreline residential 4.
4.
Okay.
What
So,
is 4? We haven't defined 4.
no, that's just where I was just gonna go there. So we don't have a segment 4 or a shoreline residential 4 yet. So what you're saying is that we're gonna have a shoreline residential 3 at where that segment break is between 4 and 5. You're saying that now we have shoreline residential 4. We've made another distinction there.
Well,
Is that what I'm hearing?
I think
No.
there's a distinction,
No.
but I don't think we decided that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we,
From my understanding, we have shoreline, SR1, that's the stuff that's built on the beach.
That's on the beach, yeah.
Okay, then we.
with a hill behind it.
Yeah, then the second definition we have is SR3, that's the bluff. We still haven't defined SR2.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
2 and 3.
Yeah, we did.
Well, no, this is the definition of a shoreline 2. We're not talking about the reaches, we're talking about the definition of a shoreline residential
Yeah, we
type
didn't.
2.
I
You're
think
right,
we,
we didn't do it too.
Yeah, so I think this might be an appropriate place for a type 2,
Okay.
and call it whatever you want to do.
2 and 3 together.
No.
I think we're
We're
only
not
up
talking about
three.
the reaches, the segments, we're talking about definition type 1, definition type 2, and definition type 3. So, we've defined definition shoreline residential type 1, we've defined shoreline residential type 3, but we have shoreline residential type 2, it's no place on the
Right.
segments yet. So that's why I'm suggesting we call this
Well,
type 2.
I guess we should have called, segment 4, we should have called residential 2.
yes,
We
let's do
should-
that.
Right?
Whatever.
We just made a
That,
mistake.
And then segment 5
No,
is
one of us picked up on it.
SR.
I'm trying to say it, sorry.
You know what I'm noticing, I'm kind of looking forward here a little bit. When we define the uses of each of these segments that we're talking about here, it seems to me like we would want to break these descriptions of these segments up separately if we had in mind that there were different uses, but I'm kind of imagining the uses under all these different segments we're describing are going to be the same.
So
So is
That's
there
what Chad
really
just
a
said.
value?
that's why I was
in
really
breaking them
begging
up?
for just like maybe 1 or 2, because in the end, you guys still have a single family residence. You still have your Cove property, which is recreation private. You still have Marine View Park, which is your public.
So I can see maybe the Cove property being a different designation, because
Okay.
when you go to list uses there, it may be different than on private property. But whether the house is on the bluff or on the beach, or in the uses that you're gonna have available for you to designate there, you're gonna probably change them at all.
I think the one place that you might run into some issues would be segment 1. And just because I think if you try to create uses for most of the houses that are off the water, and you sort of say, well, this is allowed and that's not allowed, you're gonna run into a lot of cases where there's a lot of not allowed in segment 1.
Okay.
And the question is, do you want to
So-
do that?
So if there's an area that really has some things that you're gonna call no use, then it makes sense to designate that area. But if they're really gonna be all the same, then we're just creating more lines in the document.
So your argument is SR1 and then an
I'm
SR2.
just kind of going for KISS.
Well, that rolls it up. The only reason we talk about it differently is one was bluff and one was beach.
Yeah, we thought that they had to be, that made,
I think because we didn't know where we were going with this.
yeah, that's right.
And in that case,
Yeah.
But now
entire
we
thing
got
is
through segment 6.
residential, even the urban conservancy
Well, that's the question I
areas.
asked at the very outset. Are there particular segments that you recommend being urban, and SRE said, no, they each have their little nuances, and so we're going through this exercise, nuancing.
Right.
And so I think
Because
we
as a
finished this.
land use planner, I look at strictly land use. That's all I look at. You know, I look at the fact that when you guys come in and you ask me for a permit, I'm gonna grant you guys a single family residence based on what we've got here right now in your current code. You know, if it's a park, that you can do your maintenance for your trails. If it's the cove, that you guys can do what you're doing out there. You know, I just look at that, you know. So when I'm putting together this document, that's what's going through my head. With this exercise, we're now taking into an account that you guys have environmental, physical things going on as well that they want us to look at in addition. So that's where this exercise came in. That was a huge thing. Otherwise, I could have just done a blanket and used your existing rural residential and tried to justify it. So like I said, we're trying to fit it through.
So Chad, are we at, and I guess for the group, we have a Shoreline Residential 1, which is that segment 1.
It is very
And
unique.
everywhere else where we talked about Shoreline Residential would be 2.
Okay. Okay.
And then we've got the urban conservancy.
Okay.
And why are we changing?
We have 2 urban conservancies, the Cove and the Southern End.
Segments
Sections
2 and 3.
2 and 3.
Segment 2 and 3.
So then the only thing left then is segment 6, I would assume it'd be
How about 4?
SR 2.
4 falls under
4 was
residential
Shoreline
2.
Residential 2 is
Right.
what we had said.
SR2.
SR2. And then,
So we have
if that's where we're at, the only
Right.
thing I heard in this room was Collins and others thinking that there might be parts of what we currently have in urban conservancy that might deserve or merit, I guess, a natural designation. Do you wanna?
If you're wanting it to be more restrictive,
Yeah.
so that if that's your goal is that you wanna make sure that nobody in the future could ever come down and build anything.
I'm thinking that this might help, because we've had
That's their wishes. Respect them.
Yeah. Where would that be? Is that your property and some adjacent ones to it, or?
Well, there's some on the road that are adjacent to the park too. It's like the parking lot. The north part.
Oh, Green Drive on the west side. After the parking.
I see what you're saying. See, that is actually way outside the shoreline jurisdiction, where you're on Marine View Drive and you start turning on 211th up to First. That is the upper ends of the Cook property, and that's way outside this area where the shoreline jurisdiction. So I think, I suspect it's your bluff part of your property is what you're talking about.
Okay. So when we're looking at that, I'm going to have to take that into account, and then the parallel that Richard had brought up as well. It'll be a discussion point. The last part is segment 6. I think
Well, that has bulkheads and, you know, we're down on the water.
in residential.
In residential.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Would you suggest SR2?
At least the shoreline residential, whatever number.
SR2 would be, I mean, pretty close to what you've used in the,
Here to about here.
yeah, right.
Well, or is it more like SR1?
Well, you don't have all of the non-conforming uses in segment 6 that you do in segment 1. So it's not I don't think it's the same land use wise.
So our house on the beach is not non-conforming. Now,
Well,
it should be grandfathered.
I'm just not familiar with your property.
What's the difference between grandfathered and non-conforming?
What's that?
What's the difference between grandfathered and non-conforming? And what-
Grandfather doesn't have a definition, and non-conforming's been defined by the state to give you predictability.
Yeah.
So grandfather is a term that everybody just kind of throws around. I'm grandfathered in, but there's no
It's like-
define, there's no definition, it's a slang term, and the courts don't look at that. So what they did is to give predictability to you and to the banks and to the real estate, they go non-conforming use, here it is, this is how it works. So when we go in your house, you don't have, what's your current setback from your house to your water, to the water?
Right
What would you
there on
say? Is it right on the water?
20 feet.
It's,
20, okay, so let's just say 20 feet. Okay, well, our current critical areas code requires a 115-foot setback. And when we apply that,